Dr. Alex Del Carmen, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And in light of everything that happened in the last 24 hours with this assassination attempt, what's going on now with the RNC, what are you focusing on, and maybe how much tighter can security get there in Milwaukee?
Good to join you always, Andy. And unfortunately, under these circumstances, our hearts and prayers go out to the former president and also to the family of those that lost a loved one yesterday. The thinking right now is really, first of all, what went wrong yesterday? What are the multiple failures that took place? And secondly, how can we make sure that this convention that starts tomorrow is not going to be subject to something similar that happened yesterday, right? So essentially what Secret Service right now is doing, along with the FBI, is they're looking at the entire essentially formation, what sort of design they have in place, how can they actually do a double layer type of protection mechanism at the convention? And then they're also looking at dignitaries that are going to be there and how they can essentially get them in and get them out in a timely manner.
Yeah, that is a very, very good point about everything that goes in, because this is a major event just months ahead of the election. And I do want to ask you, because we just got the shot up, the United States Secret Service, and they're not usually accustomed to holding press conferences. What do you expect maybe from this press conference? What do you hope to learn from this press conference that our viewers might also want to pay attention to?
I think many federal agencies over the course of the past years have learned, if they didn't know before, that transparency is the best answer, when it comes to situations like these. Many of us were scratching our heads yesterday when we saw what happened, wondering, in spite of the many courageous efforts of some of the Secret Service agents that were in place to essentially use their bodies as shield and protect the former president, but at the same time, there were huge and substantial failures. So hopefully today, we're going to get to hear from them directly as to what went wrong, at least what they think went wrong on a preliminary basis, and how they're going to be holding each other accountable in the coming days and weeks as it relates to not only what's going to happen this coming week, but also how they can investigate what took place yesterday.
Yeah, the accountability portion of this is very, very interesting, because we see kind of the moment happening, and much like everyone else in that crowd, they do not know what's going on, but they have the training in place. And in terms of maybe the lapse in what happened, in your eyes, maybe where does that stem from? Is it training or is it somewhere else?
I think it's all of the above, right? First of all, it's inconceivable that in today's society, when we have the technology that we have, especially Secret Service, right, where they would have the capability of social media sweeps, they would have intel locally as to, anyone expressed any desire to hurt the former president, the radiuses that are in place in order to protect that central element, in this case, the former president as well. How could it be that this individual was able to climb all the way up to that rooftop without really being detected? And even those that actually saw him and reported it to law enforcement, that nothing was done. I mean, I realize it's a matter of seconds, but in this particular instances, they are trained to respond right away. And it's inconceivable to me as a criminologist of 27 years of experience that I just cannot understand how that could happen in the 21st century with the technology that we have in place and with the systems that are in place in order to secure, in this case, the presumptive Republican nominee and likely the future president of the United States.
Yeah, that is a very good point. In those mere seconds, they could make all the difference there at something like this. And I do want to ask you about the United States Secret Service, as well as we're seeing from this press conference coming up here in just a little bit. What changes now? How much more emphasis will they put on making sure those seconds don't happen, those moments don't happen? Maybe is there something that is sent out to the group? Is there additional training over the last day or so? Is anything changed? What changes?
My sense of it is, Andy, that they're going to try to pool the best and the most talented people from across the United States in the U.S. Secret Service entity and put them at the convention. And what that means is they're going to bring those years of experience. The communication is going to have to be direct. Obviously, when you have seconds to be able to relay intelligence of what they perceive to be a threat, there has to be someone on the receiving end that gathers that information and alerts those individuals that are there. And so my sense of it is that they're not going to gamble, anything at this point, and that they're going to also be asking for not only local law enforcement support, but then the other federal agencies, i.e., the FBI, United States Marshals, and various others that are going to be in a position to help out.
Yeah, that is very, very interesting as well. And you mentioned just kind of maybe learning from that moment yesterday, less than 24 hours as well. And speaking as you have so much experience, nearly 3 decades as a criminologist, is there any other point in time, a historical context point, that they also learned from a certain moment, a certain incident? Is there anything else that you kind of look back on and see that the Secret Service has learned from that? Can you put that maybe a historical lens on this?
Sure. I mean, when we look back at the Reagan, incident where they attempted to kill, the president of the United States at that time, a great deal of learning took place, right? So, for instance, the idea of carrying the president's blood inside the beast, inside the vehicle that takes the president to and from, in order to be able to have a positive transfusion of that blood. The idea of coverage in the inner circle, in that what we call the inner perimeter, where the protectee is essentially surrounded by the best of the best, where there is very limited access to that individual in those instances. Thirdly, the efficacy in being able to have a place to go to in case of an emergency, which in this case, as we saw yesterday, in spite of the failures that took place, Secret Service moved right away. In less than 3 seconds, they were really on top of the president's body, trying to shield him. And then they escorted him to the beast, or to the SUV that actually had him in place to evacuate him from the area. And they had already a local hospital on alert. All of those things were learned at the time of the Reagan incident, and even prior to that, unfortunately, to the death of JFK, right? So these have been landmark instances. And obviously, there are thousands of times that Secret Service successfully protects the president of the United States and other dignitaries, but all it takes is one time for things to go wrong for us to be able to look back and learn from those lessons in order to apply them next time.
Yeah, that is a very good point. We're just watching the motorcade there potentially go to the airport, as he will be wheels up to Milwaukee very, very soon. And let's just talk about the motorcade, because you also mentioned it, maybe carrying the president's blood, different protocols in place. Can you kind of give us a sense of maybe how many cars there are in this? Can you give me some sense of how that has progressed, the motorcade in and of itself, as we just kind of watched it momentarily ago?
Yeah, so typically, former presidents have already a required security that Secret Service will offer for the rest of their lives. And typically, when the soon-to-be former president steps down, the security is rather enlarged, right? And it sort of fades away a little bit as time progresses. The idea is that those direct threats that they may have had at the time of their administration are going to somehow, go away, or perhaps ease to some degree. But Secret Service protection is in place until the very death of the former president. So in this particular case, we have a double layer of security. You have the former President Trump as a former president of the United States, in terms of the security that would already be in place for him, and then you have a presumptive nominee of the Republican Party who has about a 50% chance, perhaps larger, of becoming the next president of the United States. And so as a result of that, that protection layer overextends itself. In terms of numbers, I can't give you a specific number of vehicles, because that does change by situations. But what I can tell you, though, is after yesterday, former President Trump is going to be protected almost at the same level as the president of the United States today, because there will not be any more chances or any more proximity to danger that anyone is going to want to take or undertake in the months to come.
All right, that is a very good point as well, and a question I do want to get to. And I just want to note that we're going to watch this press conference hopefully very, very soon. So I will apologize in advance if I do cut you off, Dr. Alex de Carmen, because we're going to go to that momentarily. But let me just continue with this conversation. And you mentioned how after an individual, a president, leaves the White House, their security details continue to be in place as well. And we're also learning that potentially RFK Jr., another candidate for president, will have security detail to make sure everyone is safe. How common, how unusual is that? And maybe what do those security details look like, even though someone is not in office?
Yeah, so essentially, in the case of RFK, the idea behind it is that if we have people now that are going to be inspired from what they saw yesterday, are going to go after other individuals that may be running for office, whether it's tangible or not, that they become president of the United States, right? Is irrelevant. And so I think it's a good idea, obviously, to offer that kind of protection. And as far as what that entails, it typically does entail some degree of intelligence forecasting in terms of what they're going to be, having the immediate access to United States Secret Service agents that are going to be surrounding the person, being able to use metal detectors when accessing the facility where they're going to be. So there are certain protocols that are going to absolutely be in place for RFK and for other individuals that are going to be running for office, because we don't want to take the chance that this is going to happen to any of them, right? This is an attack on our democracy. It's an attack on the First Amendment. And obviously anyone that has that is an American, regardless of political affiliation, will understand and really underscore the importance of making sure that our democracy is protected at all times. And in this case, we have someone who is likely going to be the president of the United States who deserves and needs that protection at all times.
Yeah, and of course, we heard from President Biden just a little bit ago talking about how they're going to reassess or look into some of those security protocols in place for the former president over this next campaign. I do want to put up a tweet right now from the current President Joe Biden saying there's no place in America for violence or any violence. An assassination attempt is contrary to everything we stand for as a nation. It's not America, and we cannot allow this to happen. But we're also learning more information about the potential shooter yesterday. This report, as they had a briefing with reporters, the FBI Director Christopher Wray, Merrick Garland, the FBI officials say they have no reason to believe this individual was a part of a larger plot. At this time, the information we have indicates the shooter acted alone. There are currently no public safety concerns at present. And when we heard that from certainly that individual, Christopher Wray, the FBI, Merrick Garland as well. And we heard from Hal Kemper saying it would be catastrophic if they are wrong. So they may have held on to this information until they really could confirm it. What do we learn from that? And what do you make of potentially this individual acting alone?
You know, it's interesting to know, right? And it's good to know that there are not any foreign actors or any other entities attached to him. But regardless of that, you know, somebody's dead, right? You know, some innocent person that showed up to exercise their First Amendment is dead. A couple of people are injured, and our former president was almost killed. If it had not been for a fragment of probably a centimeter that he would have moved to a certain direction, he would have been dead by now. So it's all great to know that, but at the same time, the idea is are there going to be another? Is there going to be another individual that's going to be a lone wolfer that's going to be by themselves without an affiliation, that is going to likely try to replicate this instance? And so in my industry of security and law enforcement, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it does matter in the context of an investigation, but it doesn't really matter in the context of prevention, whether or not this person is acting alone or is acting with another 3 people. The bottom line is it cannot happen again.
Yeah, and in terms of maybe what is most important, what matters, like you kind of mentioned that as well, what other information are you looking for this investigation to learn? What other information do you want to know about this individual for that prevention kind of aspect of this?
Yeah, you know, we as criminologists oftentimes contend the question of what went on in this person's head, right? How did they radicalize themselves to believe that they were doing something on behalf of someone or an ideology, perhaps? Whether this person will have connections within outside entities or not, regardless, this person planned this event. It's pretty clear that this individual was familiar with the area, that understood that having a certain height advantage to where the former president was going to be helpful in his crime. And then thirdly, that the person actually understood that there was going to be some degree of outside perimeter type of security, and found out a way in order to be able to violate that. So I would say to you that that's all it takes, right? It takes somebody with the ability, desire, and capability to be able to do something like this, to carry it out. And so for me, it would be interesting to know, for instance, how did he have access to his parents' guns? You know, did his parents know anything? His cell phone. Yep. So it'll be interesting to find out what they find out in Quantico in terms of whether or not there is some information there that helps us understand his mindset and what he was planning and how far ahead he planned for this event to take place.
Yeah, that is some of the other information that we did learn from that call about the father was the owner of that weapon, but also the phone going to the lab. Also on social media, no really indication of any mental health issues with this individual. So that is just preliminary information. I did want to ask you, because we're also learning that the 20-year-old fired, and there's some speculation that the shooter might be affiliated with the military, but the military pushing back on that. Major General Patrick Ryder saying we have confirmed with each of the military service branches that there is no military service affiliation for the suspect with the name or date of birth in any branch, active or reserve component in their respective bases. What do we make maybe of that detail, that this individual was not connected to the military at least?
It's interesting, but every time that we see somebody that almost effectively shoots at somebody else in a case like this, we always wonder whether or not they had prior formal training in the military. The bottom line, though, is whether or not the guy had any exposure to being able to shoot. And in this case, I would predict that living in the countryside, being able to have access to guns, he probably had some degree of familiarity with being able to shoot at a target, right? Interesting that he chose an AR-15 as opposed to a long-range rifle, which leads me to conclude that perhaps the person went with whatever he had access to, as opposed to being able to purchase illegally another weapon of choice that would have been perhaps more enabling for him. But regardless, though, he knew what he was doing. He knew how to pull the trigger. He knew how to load up a weapon. He knew what the advantage point was going to be, and whether or not he had formal training or not. Bottom line is he knew exactly what he was up to.
Yeah, that is a very good point as well. All right, Dr. Alex Del Carmen, anything else? Because it looks like this press conference is getting going. Anything else that we haven't touched on yet that you might want to note before I let you go?
Again, Andy, I just, when you and I get together and have these conversations, it typically, as a criminologist, it's not about a really positive story. But I would say that what is great about it is the fact that there were really a lot of good Americans yesterday that stood on the side of danger and protected our former president. And sadly, even though somebody died and some other people were hurt, it is also great to know that not more people died as a result of that, right? So we have to take that into consideration, and hopefully democracy will prevail over a lot of these things. And we're certainly going to make sure that and ensure that our designees to the political office are going to be protected for years to come. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time. We're waiting on this, but we'll let you go. Thank you again for joining us. As always, great insight from you there at Tarleton University.